I'm Alan Cogan. Join me as I highlight small businesses with interviews on site at distilleries, breweries, and more. My mission is to share the stories of the awesome people behind the craft. Welcome to Crafted Conversations. Peter, we're here at Mount Defiance in Middleburg, Virginia.
Right.
Beautiful area. I've only been to the cider barn before, and I obviously a cidery and distillery. So tell me about yourself and the distillery.
Okay. Well, we've been in operation for about 10 years. 10 years ago, I was in my second career. Let me back up a little bit. I'm an aerospace engineer by education, went to University of Virginia. Worked in the space program for about 25 years, and at that point I decided to try something different, and I got into custom woodworking. And I got to know Mark Cradian, who's the managing partner of Mount Defiance Cidery Distillery, and he was looking to open a second cidery. He had one up in Stowe, Vermont, still does, called Stowe Cider. And he wanted to have one more local because he lives in Arlington. And so he started scouting locations, and he would bring me along, and he finally found this place, which is just ideal because it's a beautiful little town, a lot of tourists, a lot of charm. And so he decided to buy this place, and he hired me to do the tasting room. So the room you're sitting in, I did all the woodwork. And while I was working on the tasting room, he had gotten his cidery permit from the federal government, a winery permit. And he decided, may as well get a distillery permit while I'm at it. But he really had no intention of actually doing the distilling. And he knew that since I had an engineering background and also the craft woodworking, that maybe I'd be good at distilling. So he said, hey, Peter, you want to become the distiller? And I said, you're crazy. I brew beer, but that's about it. But then I decided to try my hand at it. And that's how I got involved in Mount Defiance Distillery. It's now 10 years have gone by, and it's what I do.
So, wow, aerospace engineer to distiller.
That's right.
Is that a traditional track?
Well, a lot of craft distillers, as you probably come to realize, didn't start out in this. It's a second career, a third career. And so it's not too unusual, I think, for engineers to move into distilling because it's an area where you like to figure things out and there's a certain amount of science involved. And so I think it's sort of a natural progression.
Were you always into like a whiskey or a spirits? Like, was that a cocktail personality, or you wanted to really get into the meat and bones of this, or?
Not so much. I was and still am a Scotch drinker. I love Scotch.
We're the same that way.
I enjoyed cocktails, and so not enough of that where I was intrigued by the possibility of actually making it myself. When I see something that I like in terms of woodworking, I'll see a particular style, and I'll say, I love that piece. I want to build it myself.
Okay.
And the same thing with spirits. If I have a delicious cocktail, I say, I want to make everything that goes into that cocktail. And so that's in part how our lineup of products evolved.
Awesome. How long has Mount Defiance been around?
Almost 10 years. In July, our 10-year anniversary.
And you've been with them
the whole time.
Wow,
Yep.
Very cool.
Yep.
Well, that's got to be probably the best part, especially because you just discussed you're a problem solver. You want to figure things out. How much fun has it been to really get your hands on the TLC building and making?
Yeah. Oh, it's a ton of fun. I mean, people say, oh, what a great job you have, and I agree. I like to get things rolling. And so for the first 3 or 4 years, I was the only distiller, and I made everything and helped design the labels and source materials and all that stuff. And then we got to be big enough where I hired a distiller, and it's a perfect mix because it lets me continue to do things that are not just every day doing the same thing over and over again. So developing new products. And that's my focus right now.
Very cool. When you started this, was there an idea of what was going to be like the creme de la creme of what Mount Defiance is, or what is your, signature, Peter made this is
right.
What my baby is?
Well, when we started off, because we were a cidery, we decided to make apple brandy because you could just take the hard cider that you've created and distill it, and you have apple brandy. So when we started off, that was an obvious choice. And we were also looking for things that would distinguish us a little bit. Back then, I think we were the 16th distillery in Virginia. There's now like 70.
Yeah.
So we were still, I thought we came onto the scene late, but we were still before the big crest. So then I looked at, rum as a second choice because, rum does have a history not only in the Caribbean, but up and down the East Coast.
Yep.
And so I said, let's try rum. We can release a white rum, which means it doesn't have to age forever, but at the same time, we'll put some down in barrels. And so rum was the second thing. The first real passion project, I'd say, was Absinthe, because again, talk about a product that people aren't making. It had only become quote unquote legal, I think 8 years before we started making it.
Yeah.
And I decided to pursue Absinthe as sort of a flagship product.
What do you think Mount Defiance has been known for now? I mean, because I'm kind of curious because the cidery and distillery, the barn is the kind of the picturesque area where events are held, et cetera. And we're in the distillery, which is, like you said, originally was both the cidery and the distillery, a little bootstrap operation, which I love. This is why I do this. But is the cidery kind of the big push now, or is it kind of hand in hand?
I'd say it's about half and half.
Okay.
In fact, the distillery side of our business has been growing. We do a lot more wholesale of distilled spirits than we do cider products, and that's been steadily growing. So I think if you were to say, what are we known for outside of this immediate local area in Virginia, I think we're getting a name more and more for our distilled spirits.
Very cool.
And Absinthe being one of the key ones. We're in over 100 Virginia ABC stores with, I think, 7 of our products. But Absinthe is the one, if I'm going to a trade show or a festival, more people will say, oh yeah, I've tried your Absinthe. That's really fantastic. That more than many of our other products.
Yeah, full disclosure, the first thing I ever tried from Mount Defiance, other than a cider, was your Absinthe.
Yep.
And it's very good.
Thank you.
It's very good. And I know we'll try some here in a little bit, but I really enjoyed the comeback of Absinthe. And we were talking a little bit off camera before about how, everyone knows bourbon. Everyone knows gin and vodka, right? Those are kind of the big players in the game. Certain things are starting to come back, like rye and American single malt is massive right now. We talked about an agave spirit. Has that been any like strategery to what you've been doing with like what you're going to make next, or is it just kind of what you feel like? How does that play into it?
More the latter. I mean, we want to present a great experience for people who come and visit the distillery.
Sure.
So that's one of the reasons why we got into so many different products, because then they can come here and it's not just try our rum. It's, what kind of cocktail do you like? We can make that for you using almost all of our own products. And so it's things that I like. I'm not a vodka fan, so we don't make a vodka. I'm not going to make something that I don't enjoy myself.
Right.
So it's been more serendipitous in terms of the next thing to come along. You mentioned American single malt. We'd like to also collaborate with other breweries, distilleries. And so Old Ox Brewery, which had a local facility here in Middleburg, also out in Ashburn, we got into a deal with them where they would brew the beer and then we distilled it and we split the product. And so a few years ago, we put down a single malt and we're going to keep that in barrels for 5 or 10 years and then we'll see how that went. So again, we'll do small things like that at the same time trying to build our core business.
When you first started, was there a little bit of a chasing the register and figuring out how to age things or sourcing things? How did that all work out in the very beginning?
Again, how fast, when can we put a good product on the market that's aged enough? So the rum, we started off using small used barrels. We were using Dad's Hat rye barrels from Pennsylvania, and 15-gallon. And then as we had the luxury of aging things longer, we would let it sit longer. So mostly, again, it's very much winging it, I'll say. But I think that the things that we've come up with have ended up being quite tasty and have a good following.
Well, one of the things I love asking about is any happy accidents, or maybe horrible accidents. Those are fun stories too. But did you come across anything that, in your 10 years here that you found that, oh, wow, this is actually working, or something maybe you never expected that you'd like? Yeah.
Well, I think the agave spirits fall in that category. I had no intention of ever making anything tequila-like, and but an opportunity presented itself, and we started making it, and it just got a very favorable following.
Yeah.
And so we're making just the clear spirits using a combination of blue Weber agave. We have to use syrups because we can't bring in the piñas and crush them and all that stuff. So we were using a blue Weber agave syrup to make what we call blue. And we also bought a product called that mixed a bunch of wild agave varietals sourced from all over Mexico to make a spirit we called Wild. And we started making the clear ones. We started putting them down in barrels. Again, we like to experiment. So we would use a rye barrel with the Wild, or we would use a ex-bourbon barrel with the blue.
I love
and
that.
So every batch of Reposado, which is aged less than a year, and Añejo, we actually have on the label the barrel, how long it's been in the barrel. And most recently, we got up to the point where we put out an extra Añejo, which has been aged over 3 years.
Very cool. It's one of my favorite parts about craft, especially, I mean, that you seem to be so enthusiastic about it, not just your tequila, but your experimentation. You can just play.
Right. And there's two pieces of that. You know, some of our products are very traditional. So the absinthe, again, I wanted to emulate the best French European absinthe. So that's what I'm going to focus on. I want people to be able to taste our absinthe and say, wow, this is better than the French one I just tried. Yeah. So I actually, when I decided to make it, I knew nothing about absinthe other than having tasted it. So I started searching. I just, obviously the herbs and the quality of the ingredients is the key thing in absinthe. So I started searching for where am I going to source my absinthe herbs? And I found, got on the internet and I found a place called absintheherbs.com. And I was like, wow, that sounds good. And it turns out the person who was selling herbs on the web was in Southwest Virginia.
Oh.
And so I called him up and said, can I come visit you? And he was like, no one comes and visits me. And so, well, I want to make an absinthe. I want to come, So he said, sure, come on down. I went down and met him and bought some herbs from him, came back here. At the time, I was just using a really tiny alembic still. I made a test batch. I went back down and gave him a taste of it. And he was like, that's not bad. Sit down, grasshopper. I will now tell you about how to make absinthe. And so he shared with me some of these old, everyone says, well, I use a 1800s recipe. Well, yeah, we do use an 1800s recipe. It's interesting. Some of these things have been translated from the French and mistranslated. And so there's this one recipe that ours is based on that was mistranslated, but he had figured it out and gave us the proper proportions. And we were sourcing all the herbs from him initially. And he grew them, all the leafy herbs. And he also imported the aniseed and the fennel from Europe. And so it made a great absinthe. We use, first of all, green aniseed to me is key to making absinthe. Some people use star anise.
Yep.
We like green aniseed. I think it's a softer flavor. Everyone describes the taste as black licorice. Well, I think star anise is more towards that black licorice taste. Aniseed is more subtle. And I think it's, to me, I like to call it an anise flavor as opposed to a licorice flavor. Right. So, and then we started growing all the leafy herbs ourselves. We have more control over it that way. Continued sourcing the seeds from my friend. And in fact, recently he's decided to shut down his retail business of absinthe herbs. He still sells to other distilleries, but we've inherited absintheherbs.com. And so that's now part of the Mount Defiance portfolio. I sell absinthe herbs to people who want to try making their own absinthe.
I love that. That sounds so ragtag and community-esque.
Yeah.
I mean, just a Google search away from making absinthe. That's pretty cool.
That's right.
Should we, absinthe is kind of a flavor bomb. Should we, I mean, you're talking about it. Should we try it? Or
sure. You can taste whatever direction you want. We can try the absinthe first.
That's cool. Well, we're talking about it, so let's do it.
All right. So lots of ways to prepare absinthe. It's 140 proof in the bottle, so it's never consumed straight. It's used in cocktails or it's diluted with water, and diluting it with water is called the drip, and that's the classic way of preparing it. For our tasting room guests, we have a really beautiful fountain where we do the slow drip through a sugar cube if they like. Personally, I think a lot of people beginner drinkers will use the sugar, but there's actually a sense of sugar that comes from the anethol, which is the aniseed, the anise flavor, that makes it taste sweet, even though there's not a single ounce of sugar in it.
Sure.
And so what we're going to do is we're going to drip through a device called the Brouillet, which is a little more basic than the fountain. And I like to dilute mine more than most. I like mine at about 4-to-1. So we're just dripping this in kind of slowly. And you'll see that, that all the oils that from the seeds are dissolved in the alcohol in the bottled product. But as we add the water to it, they come out of solution, and that creates all these millions of tiny oil droplets are what create what's called the louche.
Yeah, when I interviewed 10th Ward, that's the first time I heard that word was louche.
Oh, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, and we weren't doing video at that time, and he showed me a demonstration just like this. So I'm glad we're able to do it.
Yeah.
That's so unique.
Yeah, so a nice, strong louche is a key to a good absinthe. The absinthe is produced, there's two types of absinthe. There's verts and blancs, so green and clear. The clear absinthe they make just by soaking the herbs in alcohol and distilling it. And anything that comes off of the still is going to be clear. The verts, or the green absinthes, have another step where you take what comes off the still, you heat it up, and you add it to a second set of herbs. It's called the coloring stage, but you don't do it for the color, and it's not nice that it turns nice and green, but it's really the flavor of those herbs that you're doing that for.
Gotcha.
And it's sort of like making a tea with it.
Oh.
And then we let it, two of our products are unfiltered, the absinthe and our sweet vermouth. It's very difficult to maintain all the qualities of the flavor if you run it through a 0.1 micron filter.
Right,
so
right.
We don't do that. And so, again, it turns cloudy, it turns opalescent, a beautiful color. The other thing I like about it is that the aroma begins to evolve. You start to smell it. If you walk into a room where you've diluted some absinthe, you'll smell it as you're drinking it slowly. The absinthe will be warming up and the flavors change over the course of a glass of absinthe. So it's meant to be savored slowly like a glass of wine as opposed to, a shot of hard liquor. So why don't you give that a whirl?
Wow. Should I just out of the chalice?
Yeah. Absinthe glass, it has a little reservoir at the bottom. That's actually sort of so you can measure it properly. That's
okay.
Kind of the design of those glasses.
Oh, yeah. I know I've had this before, but it's been a while. And after you tell me all the stuff, it makes my brain misremember what I had before, and now I have it new. Mm-hmm. That anise flavor is so much more mild than what I would think of when someone says absinthe.
Yep.
Everyone thinks black licorice, like you said. That's very nice, very pleasant.
And I think that, again, the quality of the herbs, I think the aniseed and fennel is what brings the oils to the product. And if you get good quality herbs and you distill it in the right proportions, you're going to get a really nice louche. We grow the grand wormwood, the hyssop, which is a flowering, almost looks a little bit like lavender, lemon balm. And then the toughest herb to grow is another type of wormwood called Roman wormwood or Artemisia pontica. That one has been a real challenge for us because it'll grow great for a few years and then it gets some sort of a problem and it becomes weaker and it just doesn't produce. So we've been growing all of our own, but last year we had to limit our production because how much of the pontica that we got. I found a grower up in Ontario that grows pontica.
Wow.
And so I'm looking forward in a few months, they're going to send me a sample, and I'm really hoping it's as good as mine so that we can expand our production.
You talked about a little bit when you met the guy making those herbs or selling those herbs. How much of that was a learned process from that point to now when you kind of have this figured out? How many batches did you go through before you finally figured out this is what we're going to make absinthe with and bottle?
Pretty much, our first batch was a very different, first several batches. Once I got the recipe from him, we didn't throw away anything.
Okay.
It was always good. I think it got better. We actually developed a few techniques for the distillation process, not so much the basic recipe, but how you distill it, that I think improved it over time. And then after that was locked in, there is a year again, if we're low on one herb, I might play around with the coloring process. That's where most of these the tougher herbs come in.
Yeah.
To see if I can stretch how much we can make. But if I can, if I have enough herbs, I'm going to make the basic original recipe.
Very cool. And absinthe was one of the first things you did, right?
Yes.
That's pretty cool.
Yep.
That's pretty cool.
Yep.
I'm drinking history.
Yeah. Well, that's what I like about it. There is such a long history to it, and the whole, banning of it. But there's always an education process. When someone comes in, you have to tell them all about it, and then they can begin to appreciate it and enjoy it.
Yeah, no, I love this. Since we've hammered out the absinthe, and I really love that. I mean, you're still one of the few distilleries that are making it. There aren't that many distilleries out there. I think out of the 2,200 craft distilleries, I think only a certain small percentage are making
Absolutely.
absinthe.
Yep. There's been more.
I
tried to pull together an absinthe festival just before COVID, where I was going to invite as many of the U.S. absinthe makers, and actually have an absinthe competition, because these types of absinthe is not one that, when you send it in for a competition, they don't really know what to do with it.
Right.
And so I wanted to have a panel that really knew absinthe. Anyway, so I got to know what was on the market pretty well before we shut the whole thing down for COVID. But there's probably, I'd say, maybe 40 domestic makers, and that's not, may sound like a lot, but that's not many at all.
No, that's wild. And also, that's an awesome idea for the festival.
Yeah.
Man.
If I had the energy, I'd do it again, but I put so much work and money into it, and it was went up in smoke. So.
I know that the last 4 years are a blur.
Yeah.
Well, very cool. Tell me a little bit about the space, because I know the cider barn. I know that's the picturesque event space, but it originally started here. Tell me about the space and how you've kind of grown out of this and going forward.
So that you're sitting in a 1945 gas station. It was a Sinclair gas station. We actually have a little Sinclair sign that we salvaged from the place.
That's cool.
But we took it over. Initially, this was Mount Defiance Cidery and Distillery. So it's a 3-bay garage. You're sitting in one of the bays in this tasting room. The cidery consumed 2 of the bays, and the distillery was just 1 bay. And then obviously we were running out of space very quickly, and we decided to build the barn, and we moved cider production out, and I was able to take over the whole space, which is still very small, but we managed to crank out an amazing quantity of products within this space.
Yeah, you have, how many SKUs do you have?
I wish I should be able to answer that off the top of my head, but probably, when you count the variations, like agave spirits, we now have 5 different variations. And so counting everything, we're probably at 13, 14 SKUs.
That's incredible. All just from right here.
Yep.
That's impressive.
And also, one thing I have to say, we're in Virginia. Virginia is a control state, which means the state sells all of the liquor in their own stores. For us, that's actually been a blessing. You hear people complaining about control states, but for us, it gave us a willing partner to take our products and put it into more stores than we would be able to if we were just burning shoe leather trying to get people to stock our stuff. And so, we've evolved to now having 7 SKUs in over 100 stores each within the Virginia system. So they take a healthy chunk of the money from each bottle sale, but it's a system that works very well for us.
Yeah, it's kind of wild, because I've heard so many pros and cons, both ways for the ABC. And I told you off camera that I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the Wild West. I told you jokingly, but also seriously, you can buy Everclear at your local CVS or Walgreens. It's great.
If you should so want.
Yeah, you should so want. Yeah. No, but there's the MSRP thing that for Scotch drinkers like myself and yourself, if there's a nice Scotch that comes out to the market in D.C. or in Maryland or in an unregulated non-ABC state, you're going to be paying a premium plus on the secondary market. Whereas an ABC store, you're going to get it at, it's still going to be higher because of inflation and tariffs and all those things, but it's MSRP for the most part.
Yeah. So when they get some of these limited release bourbons, you're going to be, if they ever got a case of Pappy, you're going to be able to buy a case of Pappy at the MSRP if you're lucky enough to win the lottery.
Exactly.
And by the same token, restaurants, and I would hate this if I were a restaurant, but they have to buy their liquor from the ABC store, and they have to pay full freight on it.
Yeah.
And so for us, it's a good market, because a lot of restaurants in Virginia, I think Absinthe and Cassis are the 2 things that sell the most to restaurants, because we make a really great one, and their choices are limited at the ABC stores.
Yeah, no, and I guess people don't really think about how that actually is a pretty big benefit to smaller places like yourself, that you don't have to spend too much on distribution.
Right.
You kind of have a partner with the state.
Yep.
Are you outside of the state at all?
We have made forays into Washington D.C. Never, one of the things that we are not that great at is marketing and just really getting distributors. We signed on with a very small distributor. We were their first spirit. You're allowed to self-distribute in D.C.
Yes.
So we decided to end that relationship. And then we went through 6 years probably of self-distribution. And, we sold a good amount, but it never was, for the amount of effort that we had to put into selling stuff in D.C. compared to Virginia, it wasn't worth it. So when our most recent salesperson got his degree and moved off into his real career, we haven't replaced him. So I delivered to a few solid accounts in D.C., but not so much. Maryland, we did the same thing. You're allowed to just self-distribute in Maryland. And we got our Absinthe into Pennsylvania for a while through the special order. We got some stuff into West Virginia. But again, none of those things was worth the time and effort. So we've just decided focus on Virginia, get our stuff really well known in Virginia. Heck, there's almost 400 ABC stores. That's a lot of stores to be in for a small distillery like us. So if we can do well, keep on expanding the number of stores, get it out there, get Virginia to know us.
I think that's a smart play. And I actually really appreciate that, because I think there's a lot of craft operations out there who think that if I can get all 50 states, I'm going to be big. And maybe you don't want that right now.
Yeah.
Let the dominoes fall when they fall. And if you focus on Virginia, don't get too big for your britches.
Yeah.
And also there's a sense of community. I think, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. There's a perception in the market that, obviously you have the big players like Buffalo Trace and Jack Daniels and, et cetera. And they're making good products and they have a history, and that's fine. But they're in 200 countries. Jim Beam's in, I think, every country that exists, which is wild. But they're not threatened by you.
Right.
And there's, I think, a lot of people in Virginia who look at Mount Defiance or Ironclad or name the distillery and say, hey, they're made here local, using local grains as much as possible. And we might know that guy. His kids go to the school down the street from me. I'm going to buy his product.
Right. Hey, I've been to Mount Defiance, and so when I buy a bottle, I have a connection to them.
Yeah.
If you start selling in California, well, who's Mount Defiance out there in Virginia? There's nothing too special about that bottle. Whereas here, they know you're part of the community. Right.
And much to my wife's happiness, I have now, since I've been doing this, I've been paying a little less, because I love limited edition Scotch bottles and higher priced bourbons, because it's fun to have on the shelf. It is a shelf piece, whatever. But since I've started doing this, I've gone a lot around to craft places that aren't as premium of a price. However, I'm finding that, man, some of this stuff is better than the premium priced.
Yeah. I sincerely believe that volume does not equal quality.
No.
And with the smaller outfits, smaller stills, more attention, it's not that hard to make something that can compete in terms of quality with the big guys.
I think too that the TLC and the hands-on and the fact that I can sit down here with you rather than having to go through a PR firm to talk to the distiller of, I think that adds to the quality. There's no science behind that, but mentally I can have some absinthe and taste it, and it's like, ooh, it's good because I know you care about it.
Yep, absolutely.
So I think that's cool. That's my favorite part about all this. Hey y'all, Alan Cogan here with Crafted Conversations. If you want to support the show and the mission of sharing the stories of craft, head over to buymeacoffee.com/craftedconvos. I'd really appreciate throwing a couple bucks my way to help me pay for travel, the equipment that I use, the time that I spend editing, all the software that I use. I really appreciate any support you can give me. And if you can't afford a couple bucks, at least give me some feedback, or go over to your YouTube and subscribe or follow us on Spotify. Anything helps to make sure that we share the story of craft and give these small business owners a little limelight and get them out on a platform that really showcases what they're doing. I can't do this without you guys or your support, so I would really appreciate you pitching in and helping out. So I'll see you out there, and I really appreciate it. Cheers.
Great. You want to try some Cassis?
Yes. Twist my arm.
So again, we were trying to find things that would distinguish us. I think Cassis was soon after the Absinthe, one of our early products.
Okay.
I liked it because, again, French Absinthe, French Cassis. I'd like to have some consistency in what we make. And And so again, I said, what do I want to do to make a great cassis? And the first thing, again, ingredients. So cassis is a blackcurrant liqueur, and blackcurrants were actually, again, a banned fruit on the eastern seaboard because there's a insect that would transmit a disease from the currants to white pines, which they were trying to reforest much of the eastern seaboard with after the initial colonization, where they cut down all the trees to make America.
Right.
So in New York State, where blackcurrants grow particularly well, there's a farmer named Greg Quinn, and he helped actually get the legislation in New York State changed to allow the commercial cultivation of blackcurrants.
Oh, wow.
And so I found him, and I said, that's the guy I want to get my blackcurrants from. So every year we go up to the Hudson Valley where he grows his blackcurrants, and we buy a bunch of it and drive it down here and start soaking it in alcohol right away to make our cassis. The other thing that I wanted to do was a lot of cassis that you might try, the commercial brands, are very, very sweet. They're syrupy. To me, I think they hide the flavor of the fruit through all this layers of sweetness. So this is a significantly less sweet, but I think a well-balanced cassis.
Gotcha. Oh, yeah. That's not too syrupy or
not
sweet at all.
And I love, the classic drinks with cassis are Kir Royales, which is cassis and champagne,
Yep.
Kirs, cassis and white wine. And then there's a number of delicious cocktails. So I think it's a fun drink to make.
Yeah, no, I haven't had that many cassises. Cassisi? What's the plural?
I know. Brands of cassis.
Yeah, there we go. But man, that's really unique. And I didn't know much about the history of the currants.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know they were banned.
Yep. In Virginia, in fact, they still have not. The currants don't grow that well in Virginia, but I think you can buy them to grow at your house, but commercial cultivation still is not allowed in Virginia.
I wonder, is it still because of the insect, or is that?
Well, so what the Greg Quinn discovered or convinced the legislature of is that this disease is only a problem for very young saplings, and so we're no longer reforesting with white pine anymore,
Right.
and so it's just no longer an issue.
Okay.
And so that's the reason.
So it's just one of those old archaic laws that haven't been touched.
Yep, exactly.
Because it doesn't win anyone elections.
Right.
I'm going to run on the platform of.
Getting cassis production across America.
Well, that's very good. That's very unique. What's your favorite cocktail with it?
I like a drink called the Parisian,
Okay.
which is a combination of vermouth, cassis, and gin.
Mm.
And again, one of the reasons, the evolution of our products, I like to make everything that goes into a cocktail. So the classic Parisian uses dry vermouth, but I decided to make a sweet vermouth so I can make Manhattans.
Yep.
Where I make everything.
Amen.
And so I make a Parisian using sweet vermouth. And one of our most recent products is gin. So again, I needed to make the gin that went into a Parisian. And so that's the product that we've only had on the shelf for 2 years. And we were talking earlier about experimentation. I got off track, but so the absinthe was classic recipe, don't mess with it. But when it comes to gin and vermouth, there we kind of started with a blank slate. And we had an idea of where we wanted to fit in terms of the flavor. But you have a palette of hundreds of herbs and spices. And so with our gin, for instance, in America, I've listened to your podcast. I know you don't like drinking turpentine, but I feel strongly that gin needs to taste like juniper. I don't want to hide it under a ton of fruit and flour.
Sure.
So we made one that I call a continental style. It's not a Bombay Sapphire. It's not just a hardcore juniper forward gin, but it doesn't hide the juniper at the same time. So it kind of blends the two traditions.
Sure. Yeah, I found a lot of gins that I love that are hiding that juniper, just my flavor profile, and that's fine. But I think I appreciate gins that are not like a beef eater.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
just a bad London dry.
And similarly, our vermouth is, a lot of vermouths also, you wouldn't want to drink them straight.
Right.
But a couple of things make ours really drinkable. The first is that we use apple brandy as the fortifying spirit, whereas many vermouths use a grape-based brandy for fortifying. So we use apple brandy. We use a local Virginia honey to sweeten it, as well as a caramel syrup that we make ourselves, and a range of botanicals that you can sip it straight, or you can make. I love a vermouth spritzer. Just mix it in with a little bit of seltzer water, and throw a few pieces of fruit in there, and it's just outstanding.
Yeah, I agree with that. I told you off camera, I'm a massive Manhattan fan.
Yep.
It's my go-to, other than the old fashioned, but that's the Wisconsin in me. A brandy old fashioned, which means I have to ask you about brandy because I know you make it.
Yep.
And that was one of the first things too, right?
Yes.
Brandy.
Yeah.
Brandy's not that big in America.
It's not.
And so I'm curious, has Mount Defiance been able to be kind of a staple in the area for like, hey, we make good brandy?
To be honest, not really.
Okay.
It's probably, we make more brandy to go into our vermouth. And we also, over at the cider barn, we make something called pommeau, which is a mixture of sweet cider and brandy that's aged in barrels. And that's, again, a classic French spirit.
Yeah.
And so those products probably sell more than our base brandy. Again, it's just because people don't know it.
No.
And, there's been a lot of talk about when is the brandy revolution going to happen in America? And, it hadn't happened yet.
Well, I'll tell you this. It's happening in Wisconsin.
Yep.
No, my listeners know this. I've said this a billion times, but Wisconsin pridefully accounts for a third of Korbel brandy sales.
Interesting.
Out of California.
Yeah.
Obviously big, massive, mass-produced brandy.
And a lot of, people, the cognac is big, and a lot of people don't really realize cognac is brandy.
It's just in a different region.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of curious to see what happens because the market is so consumed right now by bourbon.
Right.
And rye's been close behind a little bit. But then there's American Single Malt, which is getting a giant push because new legislation's coming. But I've talked to a couple of people who think that American agave spirit, once they get the marketing down, because if you have a bottle of agave spirit next to a bottle of tequila,
right,
they're chemically the same. They taste the same, but one's tequila.
Well, I would just push back a little bit about them tasting the same. I mean, I don't try to market sometimes I jokingly say agave spirit is tequila made in America, which is kind of true. And in fact, some of the manufacturers in Mexico use the same source material that we do, which is a syrup made from the agave plants.
Yeah.
But there's some real differences in flavor. And so I try to promote it as a different spirit. It tastes great in all of the same cocktails that you'd make using tequila. But it's not tequila.
Yeah. Well, and then that's fair. I've heard both ways. I've heard some people say that we're going to market this as American tequila without using the word tequila.
Yeah.
And I've also heard that. And I'm curious what wins.
Yeah.
Because I mean, man, I know, especially at Reposado and Añejo, the aging process, the climate here is so different. The water here is different. Who knows?
Yeah. And it is kind of a tough sell. Our agave spirits sell great at the tasting room. A number of restaurants have picked it up in Virginia, and sometimes it's like, how did they learn about us? And they're using it almost as a well drink.
Yeah.
But like you said, if you have agave spirit on the same shelf, people might look at it and they're not going to gravitate to it if they're going in there looking for a tequila.
Yeah, and I think it is fair to criticize the simplification that it is just American tequila. But I think that's what they see agave and they think, oh, it's just American tequila. I'm going to go with 1800 because I know what it is.
Yeah.
And it's not the same.
Yeah.
Maybe start putting worms in your bottles.
And it's also the most expensive product that we, in terms of making the bottle, it's the most expensive for us to produce. And so it's difficult, it sells, it's not super premium, but it sells for a fairly premium price. I can go get a tequila for much, much less than they're going to spend on this. So
sure.
The challenge is, why should I spend more for this American-made agave spirit?
Yeah, that's a good point. I'd be curious too I'm going to back up. Why is it more expensive? Is it just the process? Is it more difficult to make?
No, it's the syrup itself.
Just importing?
It's just what I pay for, the amount of agave syrup that has to go into each bottle jacks the ingredient price up. It's very hard to ferment well, and so the yield of you start with X specific gravity, and what you end up in, how many bottles you get out of that seems to be less.
Yeah.
So it's just it's the ingredients.
Interesting. Yeah, well, it's stuff that people don't think about.
Yep.
But I would go back to that. I think the perception being that you're local and it's an American-made spirit.
Mm-hmm.
I think the market's shifting towards wanting to pay $20 more a bottle for a better product that's made down the street.
Yep.
At least I would. I bet, other than the expensive Ardbeg committee release editions that I need to have out of Scotland. Well, what should we try next?
Why don't we try? Well, I guess we'll leave the gin to last since that's not your favorite. So let's try the smoked whiskey next.
Okay. Cool. So tell me about it.
So our whiskey and our bourbon are from the same mash bill, 70% corn, 25% wheat, and 5% barley. And the smoked whiskey is a little bit different because there's a number of ways to get a smoke flavor into a product. One is that you malt the grains using a wood that imparts the flavor to the grain before you even start to use the grain. So that's what happens in Scotland. They heat the grain up using a peat source for their for the heat, and other people can burn other types of wood to create that flavor. We don't malt our own grains, and so we didn't have that luxury. What we do is that we create a smoky water that we use to cut the whiskey from the barrel proof down to the bottle proof. And so we have a little smoker that was designed in New Zealand, and we put different types of wood in, and it blows air through the smoker, and that goes into a tank where we're spraying the water through the smoke and kind of cycling it all over. So you end up with a very smoky water. And then we use that as in part as the cutting water. And so we use 3 types of wood. We use cherry wood, alder wood, and we actually use lemon balm and herb for another source of the smoke.
Really?
And it doesn't hit you over the head with the smoky flavor, but it adds a little something to the product.
Yeah, that's very, very light.
Yeah.
That adds a unique flavor, though.
Yep.
What's the legal designation there for calling it whiskey? Is it because you proof it down with something that's not just water?
I was kind of curious about this. You have to submit everything that you do to the federal government for approval,
right?
Including what you call it. And I described this to them in my application, and what they came back with said that what you have to put on the label, and what is on the label is a whiskey distilled from a bourbon mash with natural flavor.
Oh.
So that the natural flavor is the smoke.
Interesting. I love that. That's so unique.
And again, it is a pain in the neck to make because of the smoking process. It's not as easy as a bourbon. But it's probably equally popular in the tasting room, and people come in, they try the bourbon, they try the whiskey. I think it sells about the same.
What's the proof on that?
80 proof.
80 proof.
So we do the whiskey at 80 proof. We do the bourbon at 90.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's really unique, and I'd be great in a different cocktail because those flavor profiles that I'm getting from that smoke, it's not like you said, it's not a kick in the pants.
Right.
I've had some smoked whiskeys, other than not Scotch. Scotch that's a different animal, but I've had some like smoked corn that are just like barbecue.
Yeah.
And they're good in their own right. But sometimes it's like, well, I need to be in the right mindset.
Yeah, exactly.
This is just kind of a effervescent additive that's really unique. How did you come across that? Did you is that just one of those experiments that you came across, or?
Corsair came out with a book called, I forget the name of it, but it was all about smoked whiskeys.
Okay.
Now, I can't recall if that's where I got the idea for, certainly they didn't tell you how to construct an apparatus to do what we do. That I just kind of made up.
Yeah.
But it just got me thinking, I'd like to do a smoked product, and how can I get the smoke into the liquid?
Yeah. Wow. Interesting. Was there ever a thought that like, hey, I want to get a smoked malt like the traditional way, or was this always the
Those thoughts are out there. It's again, how many products do we proliferate into, and how often do we change things? And so,
right. No, I love it. That's cool. That's very cool.
And again, it's tough. I talked about trying to distinguish ourselves with some of our products, making things that no one else makes. Well, everyone makes bourbon, everyone makes whiskey. So the one area that we are able to distinguish ourselves in is that when we buy our grain, and over the years we've focused and gotten it more and more local.
Mm-hmm.
And but what we do is we take the grain unmilled from the farmers, and we've formed collaborations with some of the local historic mills in the area. So just down the road, 5 miles from here is the Aldi Historic Mill. It's run by Nova Parks, Northern Virginia Park System. And they agreed to mill the corn and the wheat for some of the bourbons that we put down several years ago. And so that's a lot of fun, because that's exactly what they did in the old days. You go down, the miller would mill, you leave part of it with him, you take the rest back and use it for whatever purpose you're using it for. And I love that it's just so close.
Yeah.
And we've expanded that. Now there's another mill near Tyson's Corner called Colvin Run Mill, and they ground the wheat that was going into the stuff that we're making right now.
Very cool. I love that local. I mean, it's on two fronts, right? It's historical. It's how they would have done it in the past, and it's local and community driven.
Yep.
And I'm sure they love getting samples back from what you make with their product.
And it's so fun because they love doing it for us.
Yeah.
Because they, normally they'll grind a couple pounds here and there for the tourists, and this, the guys at Colvin Mill are like, man, I'm finally able to run this mill, at full speed.
Yeah,
so
how it's
they're
supposed to be
doing
run.
some production.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of fun.
Very cool. Well, should we move on to the bourbon?
Absolutely.
So you said 90 proof.
90 proof. And again, I tend to like wheated bourbons personally, so that's why we decided to make it using wheat instead of rye.
Have you tried doing anything else, like a high rye or a
No.
malted barley with a bourbon? No.
Nope.
Do you ever want to?
Yeah. Again, for me, it would be interesting, but I know that I feel I can make the best absinthe in America. I think I can make the best cassis. I don't know that I could make the best bourbon. And so sure, I'd love to experiment. And I'd love to, offer people additional products.
Yeah.
But for me, that's not where I can reach the pinnacle of what I want to try to achieve.
I think that's a fair answer. I think the bourbon market is way oversaturated.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's a good bourbon. I love a wheated bourbon too.
Yeah.
I think the wheat adds such a unique profile to it that many people don't. I mean, high rye bourbon or just high corn bourbon is what's out there.
Yeah.
Not many people are making a high wheat one. They're starting to come into the market, but I think that's fair.
What percentage do you consider high wheat?
Boy, anything over 20,
Okay.
maybe.
So I wasn't sure about that. So this would fall in that category.
What is it?
30%.
30% wheat. Okay. Yeah, that's good. That's good. 'Cause, well, obviously 61% corn.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, 51%
51,
corn.
right.
I don't know why I said 61%. 51% corn. I haven't seen many wheats that are over like 35%.
Yeah.
And I don't know why that is. I know wheat gives a lower yield.
Yeah, and it probably reduces the sweetness. The corn is what provides all the sweet characteristics that people are looking for.
People want that
Yeah.
traditional vanilla caramel bourbon,
Yep.
which I don't. I mean, I like it, but I'm like, I want something more complex.
Yeah.
I like things that are different. So, well, cheers to this. This is good.
Glad you like it.
So, I know you're not primarily a whiskey distillery, but as a whiskey drinker, is there anything coming out that you want, or that you haven't had a chance to make, like a rye or a single malt? I know you mentioned you have some that are laid down.
Yeah.
What's the thought process on that?
I would like to do more single malt. Again, because I love it so much. The
Scotch.
challenge is that, again, we're limited by space. We actually use our still as our mash tun. And so it slows things down considerably. Now, if you're going to make a single malt, you really need to separate the grain from the beer before you distill it. And that requires another piece of equipment that we don't have. And so that's why we got into collaboration with Old Ox. I wouldn't mind, they seemed open to doing it again. It's just so I think we may go down that path. I wouldn't mind putting more single malt down in the barrels. And, since we have so little, I want to age it for a really long time, but it'd be nice to be able to, taste it along the way and maybe bottle some at different points.
Yeah, absolutely. And you were just telling me too that, your space is limited here, but you just set up a little makeshift rickhouse at the cider barn.
That's right. In order to expand, we store all of our barrels here. We got into a lot more Virginia ABC stores with our bourbons. We have to be making a lot more bourbon and our rum, and so we needed more space. We bought a 20-foot shipping container and had it dropped off, and getting it all permitted up and allow us to store barrels over there.
Very cool. What is there an age that you're like, this is what our red line is, that we have to be here, or the flavor profile that you found that's like, oh, this tastes good at 2 years, or what's the?
Well, our bourbon, I think it's hit a really nice spot at 3 years. If we had enough in barrels, I would love to age it longer, but right now we're trying to keep up with our the demand at the 3 year point. The whiskey we'll take at a little bit younger age, so minimum 2 years. Sure.
Are there any barrels you've been able to squirrel away that say, hey, this bourbon batch with, see. One day, right?
Yeah.
I love hearing stories of sometimes people who, they have a little bit too much and they forgot that a barrel was over there.
Right.
And then 6 years go by and they go, oh.
Well, one thing that we are experimenting with, I forgot to mention, but we did take some 2.5-year-old bourbon and we put it into a Oloroso sherry barrel.
Oh, yes.
And so we bought one sherry barrel and we topped that sucker off, and we're going to release that at our anniversary this August. So we're really looking forward to that.
That sounds amazing.
So it'll end up being in, actually it was 3.5-year-old bourbon, and it will have been finished for about 9 months in the sherry barrel.
Wow.
So that we've done some tastings along the way. It's developing some really nice dried fruit flavor.
Yeah.
And so I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, I have to come back up because now I only live an hour away.
Yeah.
At the time this releases, I'll be living in North Carolina.
Right.
Damn it. That sounds amazing. I'm a big sherry fan. Sherry Scotch.
Yeah.
That's my thing. Well, should we wrap up with your most? Is this the most recent that you've come out with?
The Extra Añejo is the most recent.
Okay.
This is the close on the tails of that.
Gotcha. A gin. Are you going to convert me?
I hope so.
Oh, this is.
So one of the things I really love again, we try to harken back to some of the French roots that some of our spirits have. So we call this Gin Nuvo.
Ah.
And we try to, a number of our labels, the Absinthe label, the Cassis label, they take this kind of aesthetic that came from an artist named Alfonso Mucha, who did stuff back in the Belle Epoque Art Nouveau days. And so a really lovely label that kind of mimics his style of art.
Yeah, I love it. Oh yeah, that's gin.
On our label, we said, I wanted to say, gin needs to taste like gin, but my marketing person convinced me to say, gin should be bold but balanced. Bold means you got to taste some juniper in there.
I don't hate it.
Okay, good. So anyway, that's also a very fun spirit to make. The process we take to our vermouth and our gin is that we take a bunch of botanicals, we distill each individual spirit to make a flavor, and then we get a group together. I have to give a shout out to both my distiller, Kimberly Knuckles, and a good friend of mine, Sandy Christmas. They're kind of my core tasting panel. And so we'll get together and we'll just kind of mix and match and say, oh, I think it needs to go in that direction. I think it needs to go in that direction. And then Eric Kozlik, who's the head of Modern Bar Cart, he put out a line of bitters, was the other person on the gin panel. So all those people were key to being able to put together this recipe.
What a terrible job that tastes. No, it's very citrusy.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. But that juniper does hit me a little bit. And I think this would be great in a cocktail. There are some gins that I found that I like to sip.
Mm-hmm.
And one that I'm going to give a huge shout out to out of Milwaukee, my hometown, Great Lakes Distillery makes a 4-year-old barrel-aged bottle and bond gin. Mm-hmm. And it's like drinking candy.
That is one thing that I do want to experiment is to barrel age. Not only gin, but I'm going to try putting some absinthe in a barrel. Because there are some classic absinthes that have been aged in very neutral barrels.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting.
But the other thing that we tried to do with this, and I don't know if you're picking up, but on the back end, there's a peppery note. And that comes from using 2 different types of peppers. We use grains of paradise, which were used in a lot of different spirits way back when, but you don't see it that often now.
No.
And another pepper called cubeb pepper. So both of those are in the botanical list.
Yeah. It's much more... now you say it, of course, it's like a recency bias. You say it, now I taste it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's not bad. That's again, I think for me, especially in my college days, I knew gin as this pine sol, pine tree, mm-hmm. the cheap gin that you can get whatever, and people are making cocktails with it at a college party, and right. But I think even that's a lot more juniper forward than I'm used to. I can tell that it's made by you here, and it's quality, and mm-hmm. it's cared for, and it's good stuff.
Yep.
So maybe I'm biased, right? I'm sure you are too.
Yeah, I know. It's like I tasted that, and it's like, damn, it's the best gin in the world.
Well, no, this is an awesome little operation you got going. I know you said bootlegged a little bit, but it's an awesome space because you're doing it. Are there any plans at any point to expand and maybe move out of this space and have a proper?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. A proper. Come on, this is a.
I didn't mean to say that.
nice little operation you have here.
Sorry.
We are considering the possibility of. Building another distillery on the cider barn grounds because we own 11 acres over there.
Yeah.
And that would alleviate some of our space issues. And also, we're looking at the financials because we wouldn't have to pay mortgages and property tax on 2 different places. So that's something that may happen. We'll have to do it when we're not having a lot of weddings. And so we'll either do that next winter or the following winter if we decide to move forward with it.
Gotcha. I want to reiterate, I didn't mean proper in a slur. I don't know why I said the word proper. I love this because I think I've been to a lot of distilleries that are just in like little hole in the walls that are way, 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 way smaller than what you have going on. It's a 1-man or 2-man operation.
Right.
And it's kind of fun to see what they can do with the space. Yeah. So I know, obviously the dream is to outgrow where you're at because that means more sales. Mm-hmm. But I think the fact that you're able to play rather than worry too much about the cash register, do experimentations. I'm sure you have sign off by the owners that they trust you and making good stuff. And that's really cool to hear. And you're enthusiastic about it. You know all the products like back of your hand because you made it.
Yep.
And
absolutely.
That's why I love talking to people like you because you're the craftsman.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming by.
Yeah.
Enjoyed having a chat.
Of course. Well, hey, cheers to you and keep it going, man.
All right, man.
I appreciate it.
Take care.
Thanks. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd really appreciate a follow and share on social media, subscribe to our YouTube, and be sure to give us a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. Everything you see and hear is out of pocket for us, including travel. If you support our mission of showcasing the amazing stories behind these small businesses, do me a favor and head over to buymeacoffee.com/craftedconvos. Buy Me a Coffee is an awesome way to help creators like me with simple one-time donations or a monthly contribution. Every dime goes into giving these breweries, distilleries, and more some much-deserved limelight. If you have any questions or concerns, please reach out. Cheers!